afternoon. My name is Mariya Demertzis, and I am the Deputy Director at Bruegel, a Brussels-based economic think tank. It's my great pleasure today to moderate a panel on this Research and Innovation Days, this time on all-inclusive recovery for a stronger Europe. The COVID-19 crisis is unprecedented, and governments and societies around the world have been struggling to contain this global pandemic that has caused and continues to cause widespread casualties and is severely disrupting lives and our economic societies. More than ever before, amidst the global landscape of economic threats and uncertainty, research and innovation remain essential tools to deliver on Europe's twin transformation. The topic of the plenary this afternoon is Europe's solution. How can Europe best achieve a sustainable and inclusive recovery? And with me today, I have what I can only describe as a stellar panelists to discuss some of these issues. Let me briefly introduce you to them before I give the word to them for their own suggestions on the problem. Kate Raworth is a Senior Research Associate at Oxford University and a Professor of Practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and is the author, very well known, of a bestseller book on donut economics. Sandrine Dixson-Declève is a co-president of the Club of Europe, thought leader and a chair of the Commission's ESIR expert group. Carlota Perez, who is a researcher, lecturer, and international consultant on technology and socio-economic development. Stéphanie Kelton, a senior fellow at SWOT Center for Economic Policy Analysis, a leading expert on modern monetary theory, and former US chief economist at the US Senate. And finally, Mariana Mazzucato, who's a professor in economics of innovation and founding director of the ULC Institute of Innovation. She's behind the concept of the entrepreneurial state and the missions, and has written extensively on these issues. Welcome all, and thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining the event today. In terms of setup, I'm going to invite you to answer one question, and please stick to a very tight schedule of 4 minutes. I will try to take also some questions for our public today, but I must warn you, we are very strict on time today, also because we will have the Commissioner at the end giving her own thoughts on the issue. Kate, may I start with you? You have written on a very an interesting concept called donut economics, which is a framework for approaching and measuring economic progress. Can you briefly describe this to us? What is donut economics, and why do you think Europe should use that as a better way of ensuring inclusiveness?
Thanks. So donut economics is a response to the fact that the 21st century has begun with repeated crises. 2008 financial breakdown. We are in an era of climate breakdown. We have just lived through COVID lockdown, and these crises are interdependent. They tell us that our lives are deeply connected with each other and the rest of the living world. And this goes for Europe as much as all countries in the world. So we need responses and visions and economic frameworks that actually bring these together and don't try to respond to them one at a time. And the donut is a concept that offers just this. I have one here on a stick. So the idea of the donut is leave nobody in the hole in the middle, falling short on the essentials of life, without food, water, health, transport, housing, income, gender equality, political voice. These are the essentials of life. Get everybody out of the hole and into the green ring. That was a 20th century project. Now we have a 21st century understanding that we cannot ignore. If we use Earth's resources too much in the wrong way, we push ourselves over an outer limit. We cause breakdown of the life-supporting systems on which this planet depends. Climate breakdown, ocean acidification, we create a hole in the ozone layer. So humanity's challenge is simple. We need to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And of course, I say it's simple when we see it like this, but our ability to do it is utterly unprecedented because countries have not attempted to do this until now. And I'm finding it fascinating that in the midst of COVID, in the midst of crisis, when countries and cities and nations are looking to emerge from emergency, which direction are we going to go in? More places than ever have turned to this and said, this gives us a vision of where we want to go to. If we don't know where we're going, how the heck do we know what to do tomorrow? So we need these very strong, clear visions. And for me to get into this space, we need to transform two fundamental dynamics of our economies. First, We have inherited economies that are degenerative by design. They run down the living planet. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, and then throw them away. And we must create circular or cyclical economies that use resources again and again, far more collectively, far more creatively. That is a phenomenal opportunity for innovation at the heart of Europe. But we must also transform the dynamic of economies we've inherited, which are centralizing of opportunity and value. They have too much been driving the returns of economic growth and the returns of all financial opportunity into the hands of a 1%. And we need to transform that dynamic to create economies that are far more distributive by design of opportunity and value. Those two dynamics require so much innovation, but they also open up so many possibilities, and they will start taking us to the future that we already know we want to create.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was a very comprehensive description of what is a donut economy. And I think you are pointing to the concept of having to move away from something that is strictly wealth to more than that, which is much more general description of well-being. Sandrine, may I turn to you? In fact, President von der Leyen, in her State of the Union address only last week, underlined that need to move away from what Kate described also, and it's a concept of moving away from wealth to well-being as really a measure of economic prosperity. As chair of the Commission's expert group on transformational research and innovation policy, how do you think we should reconcile the tensions between the social, the economic, and the ecological spheres?
So thank you for that, Mariya. And it's so nice to hear Kate speak as always, because her work has been phenomenal and really shifting into a model that we actually can see is working in application. And I'm really pleased that the president did listen to much of the emergence from emergency language that came out of the Club of Rome. Working with the president in particular also on the understanding of how we need to shift from an economy based on GDP and values and a paradigm shift from growth. And I think what's interesting now is that we can clearly see, and in fact, we've just released a report today urging the European Union to apply the well-being economy in terms of the way in which it recovers from COVID. And this is very much also something that through our ASEER group, which looked at the economic and the societal impacts of research and innovation, we felt was absolutely necessary if we were going to unpack the tensions between people, planet, and prosperity that Kate presented so well through the way in which the donut economic model enables us to move forward. What we're seeing now is that actually there are governments that have come out of COVID and are still in COVID, clearly, but that are looking much more resilient due to the fact that they've moved away from GDP growth as the main indicator and applied actually what we call well-being indicators. These well-being indicators are split across key economic indicators that value jobs and employment, that look at income equality, that look at fair work and business and employment and economic conditions and housing, and also, of course, very much access to health through key societal indicators. We also see that education, communities, culture, and the way in which we engage the intergenerational dialogue by bringing in the youth is fundamental within these indicators. And then we add the environmental indicators, which are so important to the donut and also to a well-being economy if we want to stay within our planetary boundaries. And this is clearly environmental protection measures, land use, regenerative agriculture, and circular economic thinking, as well as reducing our energy impact, shifting from fossil energy, to renewables, and then looking at air, water pollution, and other impacts on the planetary boundaries. So I guess what I really want to say is that we need to start getting excited. And many of these countries are in Europe. If we look at Scotland, Wales, Iceland, and Finland, who are really leading. And in fact, most of them are led by women. And understanding that what already was put forward as moving beyond GDP in 1968 by Robert Kennedy, when he made his famous speech that we do not place a value on what is most important in our societies, that now with the president's speech last week, with these incredible governments that are moving forward, we can see that we can actually apply new economic models to stay within our planetary boundaries and keep people healthy and their livelihoods safe. So I would maybe leave it at that, and really see it as an incredible signal of the leadership that Europe has right now in this area.
Wonderful, Sandrine. That's very comprehensive. I thank you also for the level of detail that you've given us in terms of how to move into these indicators, what these indicators should really look like. Let me add an extra dimension to this conversation, and that is a very relevant one for the future of our societies, and that is digitization. Digitization, and here I will try to bring Carlota into the discussion. Digitization is one of the two main shocks of the last 20 years, the other one being the opening of China in the global context. Nobody denies the benefits of digitization of the economy, but the broader effects of technological change, say of robotization on the future of work, for example, to name but one, are actually quite heavily disputed. You have recently wrote, Carlota, about capitalism, technology, and a green global golden age, where you appear to be rather optimistic, certainly about the issues on robotization. So in your view, there is no contradiction between growth, digital technology, and the greening of the economy?
Well, no contradiction at all in my view. In fact, your question expresses very clearly a big confusion that exists today. Most growth advocates think green is an obstacle, and many green advocates want to stop growth. So each is playing the other's game and getting nowhere. We're going to have to, we still have the waste economy. We don't have enough good jobs. The difficulties in the developing world are pushing people to migrate, and resentment is creating conditions for populism. Is there a solution? I mean, are we just going to want green and propose it, or is there something in the system that's going to allow us to get to those wonderful goals that both my preceding speakers have proposed? I'm going to argue three things. One, that saving the planet is the best way to save the economy. So all those people who think that green is not taking us to growth are wrong. Then that ICT, all the information technology, are the best tools we have to get there. The fact that they have now copied the mass production model and they're also doing planned obsolescence, that's like the first automobiles that look like horse carriages. They've got to leap into the world that they should create, which is a dematerialized world. And the third thing I want to say is that the best way to achieve sustainability, both social and environmental, is to change the nature, not the rhythm of growth. So we change the nature of growth. And how do we change it? By changing the direction of investment and innovation, because this society lives on investment and especially depends on innovation in order to we have to change almost everything. So how are we going to do it? We have to do it by innovation. So we need to make it profitable to invest and innovate in the direction of green. And how do we do that? By tilting the playing field with adequate policies so that the most profitable businesses are those that are good for the planet and society. So that means actively shaping technology. It means investing, the government itself investing actively shaping technology, investing in technology, but also creating all the conditions that make it better, more profitable to invest in green than to invest in the old stuff that has ruined the planet. This is also done by shifting consumer demand. And just as we took advantage of low-cost oil before to make the American way of life, which looked very good at the time, and now we know created a lot of problems, we need to dematerialize GDP. We need to dematerialize lifestyles. And in order to do that, we need to marry ICT and green. We need to marry information technology with the environmental goals and the social goals also. So we need sustainable products and services to become the most profitable, and innovation the most interesting and the most desirable by everybody. And my research about technological revolutions has shown that it's true that many jobs and skills and even whole industries are destroyed by each major wave of technical change. But that is what increases the wealth enough to be able to improve the lives of more people. And that is what robotics and artificial intelligence can do. But we also need to create masses of replacement jobs. And how is that done? Well, historically, that has been done by changes in lifestyles. So that every time you change your lifestyle, there are new needs that were not there before, and those create new jobs. And therefore, and this time, we want green lifestyles that are all about caring, about sharing, about creativity, about learning, all things that are important, about health, about exercise. All those things are the ones that would make for the good life, not the possessions, not the things. And in fact, what we need is to replace the American way of life in people's dreams by this other, perhaps European way of life that will be made up of these things. And the young and the more educated are already adopting these things. Imagine if we could change the possession economy of durable goods, which are in the planned obsolescence, and we change it every 4 or 5 years. Imagine if they could last 100 years. We have the technologies to do that. And then we would have an economy of maintenance where every product has a chip, every spare part is on the web, no spare parts ever again produced, no boxes, no moving them all over the world and then throwing them out because the model is gone and you don't need the spare part. You print the spare parts, you have them all on the web, you 3D print them everywhere when you need them, and you create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the place where, in the domestic market, it doesn't matter where the product is produced, the parts are printed in the domestic market, the products are maintained, and they last 100 years, and they can be very cheap to rent if you are just entering the consumption ladder. So the whole model, and it also allows the young all the mobility they want. It would be a completely different thing, and it would be much more friendly to the planet. Just imagine, no spare parts for any product, and no product is thrown out. And for that, of course, we would need policies.
These are very important points. If you don't mind, I need to stop you for a minute. Thank you for that. Very clear. Okay. But I'd like to bring in a member of the panel who is coming from the US, actually, Stéphanie Kelton. The American way of life versus the European way of life. You just heard Carlota, but you yourself are a very strong defender of the care economy. The question is, how are we going to achieve this twin transition, the green and the digital transitions? But can we achieve this caring economy with the tools that we have? How can we finance all this? This is an important thing in terms of achieving what Carlota just described. And how can governments help encourage the financing of activities that is going to achieve this shift in vision?
Thank you. Well, governments can help to encourage investments, but I think that what we have to recognize is that what we're talking about, or I think what we ought to be talking about, and I think it's what all of us here agree we need, is a level of sustained support of investment on a wartime footing. Right? And that is going to require governments to step up and provide sustained support in the form of fiscal policy to allow the kinds of investments to take place that it's going to require to get to the greening and to the sort of donut economy that Kate was talking about, to get us to where we need to be in terms of climate emissions. So if the question is, what can governments in Europe do to provide the financing? The answer is, for most of the governments in the EU, not all that much. Okay, and that is the problem. The problem is that governments in the Eurozone, by and large, have given up sovereign currencies. Okay, so these governments are what I refer to as users of their currency. They do not issue the euro. And we all know that this has posed problems in the past, that when economies get into difficulty, that governments are forced to borrow in competition with other borrowers, and that they've got to pay in terms of the interest rate that they're able to secure funding, rates that are market determined. And because governments now carry credit risk, there is legitimately default risk associated with lending to governments that are no longer issuers of their own currency, that they can essentially be priced out of the market. And so the question in my mind really is, have we figured this out? And is the currency issuer, the European Central Bank, prepared to do what must be done to allow the financing that we're talking about on the scale that is going to be required to keep governments able to access funds at affordable rates and to provide that sustained federal financing that is going to be needed? So the answer to the question is yes, the financing can be there, but the currency issuer, the ECB, is going to have to play, I think, a very critical and permanent role here. And I think the good news is that you have in Christine Lagarde someone who clearly has prioritized climate. She understands the climate emergency, and I think also understands the unique role that the ECB is going to have to play in helping governments get access to the financing that they're going to need in order to undertake the sort of sustained investments. So we've been talking about moving away from GDP as a measure of well-being and getting to things like genuine progress indicators or other measures of well-being. I think we have to do something similar when it comes to the way we approach the federal budgeting and fiscal conditions. So instead of having fiscal targets, we have got to replace fiscal targets with climate targets, with social targets. We need a real rethink here. And basically, we have to take debt sustainability off the table. There cannot be a question about whether government debts will be sustainable going forward, because the risk we face is that if the ECB were to withdraw support, if it stopped doing what it's doing now, which is essentially allowing governments to spend whatever they need to spend to deal with coronavirus, suspending stability and growth pact, fiscal constraints, all of that is off the table for now. The question is, will the ECB remain committed and keep those things off the table and manage spreads and allow governments to spend what needs to be spent to address the climate crisis? So when we talk about a care economy, for me, that involves things like investing in programs that guarantee economic security in the form of employment for people so that we can care for communities, care for our people, care for the planet. We can have public service employment. We can have a form of a public option in the labor market, a job guarantee program, but that must be federally financed. And for most of the countries in Europe, that's going to require, as I keep emphasizing, a commitment on the part of the currency issuer, which is the ECB.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for very bold remarks. I think these are interesting ideas. I wish we had more time to discuss this. There's a lot you have given us on the macro side, but also on this beyond GDP issue. But I wanted to stay a little bit on this, on the role of the government, if I might call it the state, and bring in Mariana in the conversation. Mariana, you have written the entrepreneurial state, and you've emphasized the essential role that the public sector plays to inspire and enable that, to drive these moonshot innovations that will make or break the future. Interestingly enough, through the pandemic, because of the pandemic, we have given the state an even more important role in the function of the economies. How do we make sure that this increased role is in line with entrepreneurialism, that operate in synergy with markets, and we achieve a successful recovery? Oh, I'm sorry, Mariana is not on the line. Would our other speakers like to take this question? The role of the state in ensuring that there is a peaceful coexistence with the markets in terms to finance the growth, before Mariana joins us again.
Well, I'm happy to take part of it if you want, Mariya, but I'm sure that my colleagues would be able to do it as well. I think
if you
there's
take 1 minute to bring, that would be very, very useful. 1 minute, one
Yeah,
thought.
before Mariana comes back, there's an absolutely role of the state. And in fact, right now, what we're seeing is a real problem of going back to business as usual in terms of the way budgets are being spent and the way our funding is. There's a Bloomberg report that just came out yesterday, which said that actually 80% of the recovery funds, the trillions of dollars that have gone into the COVID recovery, have actually gone into brown industries and not into green and social programs. And that is a real problem. So if we have a total disconnect between the way in which we need to build this well-being economy and the way in which we need to build resilience to the future crises that we will see from the health pandemic, but also from climate change and biodiversity, and that actually our governments are making decisions to spend their budgets on a business as usual economy rather than the economy of the future, then we're going completely into a wall. So I think this is a real issue. What we're seeing is the bravery. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I think Mariana is back. Thank you, that's very clear. But can we also give the opportunity to Mariana to express? Mariana, I don't know if you've heard the question that we had.
No.
On the role of the state. How can we ensure that the role that the state has taken up can be a peaceful coexistence with markets to finance that successful recovery?
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know how it happened. I got kicked out. I thought maybe you guys started to worry about what I might say.
No way.
Anyway, so I think it's a great question. And I obviously, actually not obviously, I do support everything I heard with a bit of differences, which I'd love to talk about. In other words, what the actual potential is in Europe right now that we don't necessarily see in the EC because of its structure. But first of all, one of the things I've been banging on about everywhere, including in the Commission with the work on missions that I was very happy actually became a legal instrument, is that we need to always remember that economic growth has not just a rate, but a direction. And it's in fact that directionality that we're obviously talking about right here. But the problem is the tools on the ground that governments have, and this is also multinational organizations in some ways, including the European Commission itself, have for too long been fed this idea that you actually have to wait for a problem to arise, for a market to fail before you come in. So in economics, because we like to sound smart, we call this market failure theory, and there's lots of equations that support that. And, you know, as important as it is to fix markets because of negative externalities like pollution with a carbon tax, very important, positive externalities, funding R&D. We can't interpret these as just fixing markets. The way we do it, the direction through which we do it, as Carlota was talking about in terms of tilting the playing field, has to be driven by a different framework. So I call this market shaping and market co-creation, not market fixing. And this, you know, is first of all what got us the ICT revolution. Had governments simply fixed their way through, we wouldn't have had any of the technologies that make this thing smart and not stupid. So internet, GPS, Siri, you know, voice activated system. I've written about this in the entrepreneurial state. But the real question is, what does that mean for the future? What does it mean for our ability to actually tackle even harder problems than going to the moon? Going to the moon was almost purely a technological problem, and we made it. The kind of problems that are underlying the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and, you know, this year we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the organization that made that happen, the United Nations, are much more hard. They're wicked problems. They're full of social, behavioral, political issues. So the real question is, how do we redesign the tools that we have from procurement policy, right? So procurement is a large chunk often of government budgets, grants, loans, prize schemes, industrial strategy, innovation policy, to really catalyze investment in both the public and private, and increasingly, by the way, in the third sector. So nonprofits in different areas like health and energy do have a role. And so this is where the missions concept comes in. And I wrote that report. Let me see. I tend to have all these reports near me. Here we go. There we go. Like Kate's donut, I just have boring words. You know, this idea that we needed a mission-oriented approach in Europe. And the idea is that you begin with those big challenges. And then from the state, I hate to say it, in a semi-top-down process, but with as much citizen engagement as possible, transform that into really concrete but bold, ambitious mission, like carbon neutral cities, like getting the plastic out of the ocean. But the next steps are really hard, and they have to be as participatory as possible. In other words, they have to galvanize as much investment as possible across the whole economy. This means taking missions outside of a siloed moonshot approach and actually in an intersystem, interdepartmental, intersectoral approach, and strengthen the underlying systems, but also that question of redesigning the tools like procurement. So, this is the sort of setup. You begin with the challenges. It's very hard to do this. Challenges, missions, impossible. Sectors, projects. And I think this is what reinventing the state means: to be purpose-driven, to be directed, to focus on the big goals, but then to get your hands dirty and to admit that it's going to be hard, and redesigning those tools that until now have just been very static and linear. For example, I already mentioned procurement. It's often just driven by cost, giving the contract out to the private firm that promises to make it in the cheapest way. If you actually want innovative solutions, and as many of those possible solutions to pick from, because biodiversity is good in your choice set, we need to rethink that kind of siloed net present value, cost benefit kind of model. I'm sure I've already taken up my 4 minutes, but just finally, I do want to say that what's really exciting in Europe right now, just to kick back a bit on Stephanie's point that Europe is badly placed, we have, and I know, Stephanie, I'm putting words in your mouth a bit because I know you were talking about more theoretically from the finance side, but Europe is experiencing a real Marshall moment. We have a very large recovery fund, and for the first time in a long time, that fund is conditional on the member states actually investing, having a plan around climate, digitalization, and health. No longer about cutting deficits. And I won't go into that, but the old kind of troika thing, which is here's some money if you promise to reduce your deficit. This time it's where's your plan? And I think this is a really important moment, not only for the nations themselves, the member states, to come up with those plans, and I'm working very closely with the Italian government where I'm an advisor, but also intergovernmental learning between states. What works, what doesn't. There's so much heterogeneous experience in Europe. Germany has particular types of institutions that Italy doesn't have. Let's share that experience, Italy as well, and experience with those institutions, how they're actually governed. So the governance of this recovery matters. We need the tools on the ground to be as ambitious as the kind of high-level missions around the Green Deal.
So, Mariana, if I may push you a little bit on this issue, and again, following up from what Stéphanie said, do you think that the firepower that the EU has right now in the combination of the recovery fund, the 7-year budget, and also the country firepower, do you think that the state has the firepower to achieve all that?
In an article in the Financial Times this summer, August 6th, I think it was, which was to say that yes and no. We need to start aligning the firepower. If you sum up all the different funds, so the total of the recovery, close to 2 trillion, and then all the different institutions, the European Investment Bank, and then nationally, the other types of public banks, like in Germany, the KfW, in Italy, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, and so on. If we actually start creating more alignment around, again, this issue of directionality, which doesn't mean micromanaging the tools. By definition, again, you want, as I mentioned before, diverse tools, but also different kind of solutions that they can catalyze. But if we don't have a strong mission and direction on the top, then the risk is that all these funds actually don't line up. And this concept of missions and mission orientation, which we brought to DG Innovation, I just argued in the FT, had to be brought up to von der Leyen's cabinet. It actually has to be the way we structure not only the Green Deal, but the recovery itself. And currently the structural funds, DG Connect, the recovery, they're all a bit dispersed and not actually making the sum of the parts, or whatever that expression is, making sure that when you sum the parts, the actual effect is greater than that. So the multiplier effect will be much greater if we align that funding. And if we do that, then yes, we have the firepower.
Okay, thank you very much for this. It's a very clear answer. I see also now that the Commissioner has joined us. Commissioner Gabriel, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And in your portfolio, you have all the elements necessary to sustain a strong recovery in Europe: education, research, innovation, culture, and youth. Now that's firepower. It's my pleasure to give you the floor now, Commissioner, for your concluding remarks on how Europe can best achieve a sustainable and inclusive recovery.
Thank you very much, dear ladies, all-women panel. What's a strong message that for resilience and the recovery of Europe, we all need your thoughts, your expertise, your vision, and your ideas. So, yes, I have a key elements under my portfolio, but now the question is how to transform these elements into something operational, which is something innovative and which will be really something concrete and useful for our citizens and for our member states. That's why, first of all, dear ladies, thank you very much for your valuable contributions. For me, it's a great pleasure to be with you and to listen to you. Mariana, you just said it, mission-oriented approach, moonshot approach. We need synergies, we need directionality, we need targeted investment. So all these keywords, now it's time really to operationalize them. That's my main message. And I would like really to insist on 3 main points. The first one, it's very clear that if you'd like to move forward, we need to accelerate. We need to accelerate our European transformation through an economy that works for people, the European Green Deal, and Europe fit for the digital age. And that means that we need definitely a new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. It's a very good ambition to be climate neutral continent by 2050. This represents an extraordinary economic and societal opportunity, but in parallel, we need to take into consideration some sensible aspects, because all this is transforming our way of life, our way to work. And this transformation, first message, needs to be in line with our European values, with the interest of our European citizens. And that's why I'm very happy that was raised by all of you that research and innovation are critical to support this goal by boosting the resilience of our societies, of our economies, and at the same time to support our wish to affirm a real European leadership in this global race for technology. Second, I think that this time we should accelerate in order to make Europe better prepared to tackle the multiple global challenges ahead of us. Because yes, COVID-19 demonstrated the importance of cooperating in science and innovation, because we need to rapidly deliver solutions in our most pressing needs. But that was mentioned, there is different aspects: health, digital, climate-related research and innovation, socio-economic research and innovation. They are all indispensable to deliver effective and quick responses to such emergencies. And we need to continue to reinforce Europe's resilience and preparedness for the future outbreaks and to join forces for containing their spread early on. And third, I think that was mentioned, we need stronger cooperation links. And that means that maybe sometime we need to go out of some of the comfortable ways to do and to innovate. It's not only about the importance of European research area, because we have here some founding principles. It's important to continue to build ecosystems. It's important to see how this time the beautiful word synergy will really work, and that will mean something concrete for our researchers, for our innovators, for our regions, for our member states. That's why I fully support the idea that definitely this time we need to better align the national and European strategies, investments, and at least instruments that we need at national, at European level to have in a more coordinated manner. Because I think that one of the strengths that we have as Europe, when we talk about research, innovation, and the contribution for the recovery, is that this time we all have seen that research and innovation are able to live with their own time. We are able to mobilize very quickly some of our instruments. We are able to innovate and at the same time in a very holistic approach, in an approach where we are really trying to do this since the beginning with the logo "No One Left Behind." That will be one of the main messages. And I think that the COVID-19 just was one of the examples that we can expect others in front of us. But every day in this crisis, research and innovation have demonstrated that they are playing an essential role in saving lives and in creating a brighter future for Europeans. So that's why I think that today there is some very strong messages. Let's continue to work in synergies. Let's align better investments and not only beautiful words, but let's identify joint actions, concrete impact, strong collaboration, and research innovation at the core as a driver of the European resilience and the European recovery. Thank you very much, dear ladies. Thank you again for your contribution. I really look forward to continue working together on how Europe can best achieve a sustainable and inclusive recovery and how research innovation can underpin it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for this inspiring words, emphasizing the need for cooperation. This is the time I think that we should come to a close. I wanted to briefly summarize what we've heard, the need for the caring economy, moving beyond GDP, greening the economy. And as Carlota said, if I may paraphrase you a little bit, the best way to save the economy is by saving the planet. I think these are important things in which the state, no doubt, will have a crucial role to play, but also markets will have to come there to ensure that the funds that we have put together in Europe for a recovery are funds that are well spent and they are meant to provide prosperity in Europe in a way that is sustainable for the next generations. With that, I wanted to say to Kate, Sandrine, Carlota, Stéphanie, and Mariana, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, Commissioner, thank you for making this all possible, and again the European Commission for putting this together. I hope we'll have the opportunity sometime in the future to take more time to put some more details to these issues. But for the moment, thank you all for joining us, for taking the time, and for your comments.